Australia is often heralded as the lucky country, a land of shimmering coastlines that prizes mateship above all else. It is a place where the sun seems to wash away the sins of the world, offering an idyllic life in quiet, tree-lined suburbs. Yet, beneath this veneer of sun-drenched tranquility, there exists a darkness that defies the warmth of the landscape. We are taught that the home is a sanctuary, and the bond between a mother and her child is the most sacred, unbreakable force in nature. We rely on the maternal instinct as a fundamental truth, the idea that a woman is a natural nurturer. When that instinct is perverted into something predatory, the shockwaves shatter the foundations of our social contract. This is the story of Australia's most notorious female killers. Women who wore the mask of the ordinary while harbouring an extraordinary capacity for evil. In the rolling hills of rural New South Wales, the domestic life of Kathleen Folbigg once appeared to be the epitome of suburban normalcy. To her neighbours, she was a woman acquainted with more grief than any person should ever bear. Between 1989 and 1999, Kathleen and her husband Craig endured the unthinkable 4 times. It began with Caleb, who was only 19 days old when he stopped breathing. Then came Patrick, who survived an initial life-threatening event only to succumb at 8 months. Sarah followed, living for 10 months, and finally Laura, who reached 19 months before she was found lifeless in her crib. For a decade, the public saw a mother cursed by a cruel series of sudden infant death syndrome cases. The narrative was one of a tragic, grieving woman, a victim of fate whose womb seemed haunted by a recurring shadow. However, behind the closed doors of the Folbigg home, a much more sinister reality was being recorded in the private pages of Kathleen's diaries. These journals were not merely a place to vent sorrows, they became silent witnesses to a psychological unravelling. In her own handwriting, Kathleen spoke of a struggle that felt less like grief and more like a resentful war. She wrote of stress and the struggle of motherhood, but with a chilling edge that suggested her children's demands were an affront to her existence. She described her daughter Sarah as a fairly good-natured child, only to follow it with the terrifying admission that it saved her from the fate of her brothers. The words whispered of a woman who viewed her offspring as obstacles to be managed or removed. The turning point came when Craig Folbigg, a man hollowed out by the loss of his family, stumbled upon these journals. As he turned the pages, the mask of the grieving mother slipped, revealing a stranger. The realization was a physical blow. He wasn't just a father who had lost children to nature. He was a man who had harbored their potential killer. The subsequent trial gripped the nation, painting Kathleen as Australia's worst female serial killer. The prosecution argued that she had smothered her children in fits of rage, unable to cope with the demands of motherhood. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison, her name becoming synonymous with the ultimate betrayal of the maternal role. Yet the case did not end with a prison sentence. In a twist of forensic science, researchers recently discovered that the Folbigg children carried a rare genetic mutation, CALM2, which can cause sudden cardiac arrest. This breakthrough turned the legal system on its head, leading to Kathleen's pardon and release in 2023. Was she a cold-blooded killer who used her diaries to confess, or a victim of a tragic genetic legacy? As we look deeper into the history of Australia's female predators, we find cases where the guilt is far less ambiguous and the depravity far more visceral. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. While the Folbigg case remains a point of contention and scientific debate, there is another name in the annals of Australian crime that leaves no room for doubt or mercy. Within the quiet, tree-lined streets of the small town of Aberdeen, Katherine Knight honed the skills that would make her the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Unlike the quiet struggle of the Folbigg home, Knight's life was an explosion of rage. To understand the horror of February 2000, one must look back at a timeline of red flags that everyone ignored. Knight was not a woman who hid her capacity for violence. She wore it like a badge of office. Knight's history was a catalogue of extreme domestic abuse. She once smashed the dentures of an ex-husband and reportedly slit the throat of a partner's puppy just to demonstrate her capacity for cruelty. Her proficiency with knives was her profession. At the slaughterhouse located on the outskirts of town, she was known for her speed and cold detachment while deboning carcasses. This professional skill set would later intersect with her personal vendettas in a way that would haunt the memories of New South Wales. John Price tried to see the best in a woman who gave him every reason to run. Their relationship was a turbulent cycle of Knight's explosive anger followed by manipulative affection. By early 2000, the mask had fallen away. Price was terrified. He sought a restraining order after she attacked him with a knife, but he found himself lured back into her orbit one last time, hoping things would finally change. He had even told co-workers that if he didn't show up for his shift the next morning, it would be because Knight had finally killed him. It was a chillingly accurate prophecy that revealed the atmosphere of dread hanging over their quiet Aberdeen home. On the night of February 29th, the tension reached a breaking point. As John Price slept, he was no longer a partner in Knight's eyes. He was a target. She attacked him with a butcher's knife with a 10-inch blade, a tool she understood with intimate familiarity. The struggle was desperate and bloody, trailing through the hallway as Price tried to reach the front door, his life spilling onto the floorboards. He was stabbed 37 times, his life stolen in his bedroom. But for Katherine Knight, the murder was only the beginning of a ritual designed to desecrate the man who left her behind. When police arrived the next morning, they walked into a scene of human depravity. The hallway was slick with gore. In the kitchen they found a sight that defies comprehension. Knight had used her professional training to skin Price with such precision that his hide remained whole and eerily intact, which she then hung from a meat hook like a macabre trophy in the lounge room. On the stove, pots were bubbling with a macabre stew. Knight had decapitated Price and placed his head in a pot with vegetables. Even more chillingly, she had carved slices of meat from his buttocks and prepared them as steaks, complete with gravy. She had set the dining table with name cards for Price's children, intended as a final meal upon their return from school. The motive was the ultimate expression of ownership and revenge. Knight wanted to consume Price, to turn him into the product of her life's work. When police finally located her, she was in a deep, medicated sleep. Her calm demeanor during questioning sent chills through the detectives. There was no remorse, no maternal instinct, and no tears for the man she had butchered. She was a predator who had completed her most gruesome work, marking a dark chapter in the nation's history. Yet, as Australia reeled, another shadow was growing in the north, where the betrayal of the feminine role would take an even more predatory and calculated turn against the most innocent members of society. While the world recoiled from the butcher's shop in Aberdeen, a different kind of darkness was already woven into the fabric of the Australian sunshine. Thousands of kilometres to the north, in the coastal haven of Noosa, the concept of the protective mother was not just subverted, it was used as a lethal weapon. In the late 1980s, Noosa was the crown jewel of Queensland's Sunshine Coast, a place of surf, sand, and the perceived safety of a tight-knit community where doors were often left unlocked. It was here that Valmae Beck proved that the most dangerous predators do not always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they sit in the front seat of a car, smiling through a window, looking exactly like someone you could trust. The date was November 27, 1987. Sian Kingi was just 12 years old, a schoolgirl with her whole life ahead of her, pedaling her bicycle through the warm afternoon air toward her home. She was the picture of innocence, someone who had been taught the standard lessons about avoiding strange men. But she had never been warned about the unassuming woman with the permed hair and the matronly demeanor. Valmae Beck was not a lone actor. She was the essential bait for a predatory trap. Alongside her husband, Barry Monday, she patrolled the streets of Noosa, looking for a victim to satisfy their shared, twisted urges. This was the terrifying essence of their relationship, a rare and lethal psychological partnership known as folie à deux. In this madness of two, the boundaries of morality and human empathy dissolved, replaced by a singular predatory hunger that required both of them to function. When the couple spotted Sian on her bike, it was Valmae who took the lead, understanding that her presence would lower the young girl's guard. A lone man in a parked car is an immediate red flag to any child, but a man and a woman together create a facade of normalcy and safety. Valmae beckoned Sian over, using her motherly appearance to bridge the gap of suspicion. She spoke to the girl, perhaps asking for directions or help with a fabricated problem, leveraging Sian's natural helpfulness and respect for her elders. Sian, raised in a world that valued kindness, stepped toward the car. In that moment, the maternal mask became a shroud. Valmae didn't just witness the abduction, she was the primary facilitator, ensuring Sian was forced into the vehicle where her innocence would be systematically destroyed. The disappearance of Sian Kingi shattered the peace of the Sunshine Coast and sent a tremor of fear through every household in Australia. What followed was one of the largest and most desperate manhunts in Queensland's history. Hundreds of volunteers, police officers, and concerned citizens scoured the dense bushland, their hopes buoyed by the belief that a 12-year-old couldn't just vanish. But as the days bled into a week, the optimism curdled into dread. 6 days after she vanished, the dream of a safe paradise was permanently extinguished when Sian's body was discovered in the Tinbirwa State Forest. The details of her final hours, which emerged during the subsequent investigation, were so harrowing that they left veteran detectives scarred. Valmae Beck hadn't just stood by. She had watched and participated as Sian was subjected to unspeakable cruelty before being killed. The public outrage that followed the arrest of Beck and Monday was visceral. While the nation was used to the idea of male violence, the realization that a woman, a mother herself, could actively participate in the hunting and murder of a child was a psychological blow that Australia struggled to process. During her court appearances, police had to hold back angry mobs who wanted to exact their own brand of justice. Even within the harsh hierarchy of the prison system, Valmae Beck was a pariah, despised by other inmates for her violation of the most basic human instinct, the protection of the young. Throughout her decades behind bars, Beck's coldness remained her most chilling trait. She refused to show genuine remorse or provide the Kingi family with any sense of closure. She became a woman of secrets, and as the years passed, investigators began to wonder if Sian Kingi was truly her only victim. Given the couple's nomadic lifestyle, there were fears that they had left a trail of missing children across the Australian continent. Beck took those secrets with her to the grave in 2008, leaving behind a legacy of ruined innocence and a haunting question. How many more predators were hiding behind the faces of ordinary neighbours? As the 1980s faded, the nature of female evil began to shift once more, moving from the predatory couple to a singular, suffocating obsession, one where a woman didn't want to kill for a partner, but wanted to kill to become someone else entirely. As the shadow of Valmae Beck faded into the history books, a new and perhaps even more unsettling form of darkness was festering in the quiet suburbs of Melbourne. This was not the chaotic shared violence of a predatory couple, but the cold, clinical and solitary obsession of a young woman named Caroline Reed Robertson. While the previous cases had been driven by externalized rage or perverted partnership, Robertson's crime was born from a profound, hollow void within her own soul, a void she believed could only be filled by stealing the life of another who possessed everything she felt she utterly lacked. The target of this pathological envy was 15-year-old Rachel Barber. To the world, Rachel was a vision of grace and promise. A talented dancer at the prestigious dance factory, she possessed a natural radiance and a beauty that seemed to light up any room she entered. She was truly loved by her grieving family and adored by her boyfriend. But to Caroline, a 19-year-old former babysitter who lived in a state of perpetual self-loathing, Rachel was not a human being. She was a blueprint. Caroline looked into the mirror and saw someone she deemed insignificant. When she looked at Rachel, she saw the person she deserved to be. The obsession was a meticulously documented descent into madness. Inside her flat, police would later find notebooks filled with a chilling manifesto of identity theft. Caroline had written out detailed plans to reconstruct herself, believing she could occupy Rachel's skin. The journals contained lists of cosmetic surgeries, instructions on how to mimic the girl's mannerisms, and even a draft for a new birth certificate. She viewed Rachel's existence as a garment she could simply put on once the original owner was discarded. This was a hunger that went beyond simple jealousy. It was a total rejection of her own identity in favor of a stolen, more perfect one. On March 1st, 1999, the trap was finally sprung. Caroline contacted Rachel with a tempting offer, one that played on the young girl's desire to help her family financially. She told Rachel about a confidential psychological study that would pay $100 for a few hours of work. She insisted that the meeting must be a secret, instructing Rachel not to tell anyone where she was going. Rachel, trusting and kind-hearted, agreed to the mysterious and secret terms. She boarded a Melbourne tram and disappeared from her life, leaving behind a family whose world was about to be torn asunder by an invisible, envious, and highly calculated predator lurking in the cold shadows. Inside Caroline's cramped apartment, the facade of the psychological study quickly dissolved into a nightmare. The air was thick with the suffocating energy of Caroline's desperation. As Rachel sat there, perhaps sensing the shift in the atmosphere, she was utterly vulnerable. Caroline, driven by a warped sense of destiny, attacked. In a struggle that lasted minutes but felt like an eternity, she used a telephone cord to strangle the life out of the girl she so desperately admired. There was no heat of passion in the act, only the cold execution of a necessary and horrific step in her plan. Once the light left Rachel's beautiful, trusting eyes, the true transformation finally and tragically began. Caroline cut her own hair to match Rachel's style and applied for a new passport, believing she could now step into the vacancy she had created. Rachel's body was stuffed into a wardrobe, while Caroline attempted to navigate her new reality. For days, Rachel's parents searched frantically, their grief televised to a nation that hoped for a miracle. Meanwhile, Caroline remained eerily calm, visiting a doctor while the girl she murdered lay just feet away in her closet. When police finally knocked, they found Rachel's body wrapped in a rug. The girl was gone, and the woman who wanted to be her was left staring into a dark, silent, and empty void. The chilling stillness left behind by Caroline Reed. Robertson's hollow victory over Rachel Barber shifted the Australian public's attention toward a mystery that was far less visible, but perhaps even more complex. It was a story not of a stolen identity, but of a hidden one. At the heart of this enigma was Keli Lane, a woman who seemed to embody the very pinnacle of Australian achievement. She was a blonde, athletic water polo star, a woman of drive and discipline who moved through the world with the confidence of an elite competitor. Yet, beneath the surface of her disciplined sporting life, Keli Lane was weaving a web of deception so intricate and so pervasive that it would eventually lead to one of the most controversial murder convictions in the nation's history. The contrast between her public persona and the cold secret she kept remains deeply jarring. The focus of this dark and unsettling narrative was a tiny, defenseless infant named Tegan Lane. On September 12, 1996, Keli gave birth to Tegan at Auburn Hospital in Sydney. To the nurses and hospital staff, she appeared to be an ordinary mother preparing for the immense challenges of parenthood. She signed the paperwork, held her daughter, and prepared for discharge. But within hours of walking out those hospital doors, the trail of Tegan's life simply vanished into thin air. While Keli returned to her demanding life of training and social engagements, the daughter she had carried to full term disappeared into a void that no investigator has been able to fill for decades. For years, no one in her inner circle even knew Tegan was missing, because no one, including Keli's closest friends or teammates, knew she had ever been pregnant. The cracks in Keli's carefully constructed facade did not appear until many years later, when child protection authorities began the routine task of cross-referencing birth records with school enrollments. They found a glaring discrepancy. A child born in 1996 who had never been enrolled in school or seen by a medical professional. When finally questioned by police, Keli Lane did not react with the frantic panic of a mother who had lost her child. Instead, she produced a story that was as detailed as it was impossible to verify. She claimed with absolute certainty that she had handed Tegan over to the child's biological father, a man she identified as Andrew Morris, or perhaps Andrew Norris. This mysterious Andrew became the focal point of a massive search that spanned the entire Australian continent. Keli described him as a fleeting lover, a man with whom she had a brief, intense affair, and who had supposedly agreed to raise the child in total secrecy to protect her athletic career. However, as detectives dug deeper into Keli's history, they discovered a startling and pathological pattern of behavior. Tegan was not the only secret she had kept buried. Keli had hidden multiple pregnancies, successfully concealing them from her teammates and family before giving other children up for adoption in secret. She was a master of physical and emotional compartmentalization, a woman who could play a high-stakes match one day and go into labor the next. The prosecution's case, which eventually reached the courtroom in 2010, was built on a foundation of absolute absence. There was no body, no weapon, and no physical evidence that a crime had been committed. There was only the haunting silence where a child should have been and the impossible, shifting narrative of a mother who could provide no proof that her daughter was still alive. The Crown argued that Keli Lane had killed Tegan because the infant represented an intolerable burden, a threat to her Olympic aspirations and her image as a golden girl. They painted a picture of a woman who viewed her children not as human beings, but as inconvenient obstacles. Throughout the grueling trial, Keli maintained a chilling composure, a stoicism that many observers and jurors found deeply unsettling. She insisted that Tegan was out there somewhere, living a happy life with a man who simply didn't want to be found. But the jury saw a different truth, convicting her of murder based on the sheer weight of her lies and the statistical impossibility of her stories. Even today, from behind the bars of a prison cell, Keli Lane continues to proclaim her innocence, while the Australian public remains haunted by the image of that hospital exit. The question remains, what truly happened in the hours after Keli walked out of that ward? The mystery of Tegan Lane is a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest, a reminder that the most dangerous lies are often the ones we tell ourselves to keep our world from falling apart. The collective weight of these stories, the cold calculations of Keli Lane, the vengeful butchery of Katherine Knight, the predatory partnership of Valmae Beck, the obsessive jealousy of Reed Robertson, and the silent, repetitive tragedy of the Folbigg household, serves as a profound fracture in the Australian national psyche. For a country that prizes the sun-drenched ideals of mateship and the lucky country spirit, these cases represent a dark, inverted mirror. We are biologically and socially conditioned to view women as the ultimate nurturers, the protectors of the hearth, and the keepers of the future. When that fundamental archetype is shattered, it leaves a scar that time struggles to heal. These names have become more than just entries in a criminal database. They are markers of the extreme limits of human depravity. When we analyze the motives, a disturbing spectrum of human failure emerges. For Katherine Knight, the motive was a raw, primeval need for total domestic dominance and revenge. The scene she left behind in Aberdeen for John Price's children to find was not merely a murder. It was a ritualistic desecration meant to inflict the maximum possible psychological trauma. In contrast, Reed Robertson's motive was rooted in a hollow sense of self. She did not want to kill Rachel Barber out of hatred, but out of a desperate pathological desire to replace her, to steal her beauty and her very essence. Then there is Keli Lane, whose motive appeared to be the preservation of an image. Tegan Lane was not a victim of rage, but of logistics, an inconvenient variable in a life calculated for athletic glory. This lack of empathy is the common thread that binds these disparate cases. Psychological profiles often point toward the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Valmae Beck, in her disturbing union with Barry Munday, exhibited a chilling Machiavellianism, using her motherly appearance to lure Sian Kingi into a trap. This folie à deux suggests a shared psychosis, where normal moral boundaries are completely discarded. These women did not just break the law, they operated outside the very concept of human conscience. They were able to blend into the mundane rhythms of suburban life, attending barbecues and working jobs, all while carrying secrets that would turn the stomach of the most hardened investigator. The legal impact of these crimes has been transformative, forcing Australia to rewrite its understanding of domestic violence and sentencing. Katherine Knight became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a legal recognition that some acts are so beyond the pale that redemption is impossible. The disappearance of Tegan Lane and the resulting conviction of Keli Lane highlighted the legal weight of a mother's lies, even in the absence of a body. The Folbigg case has sparked a national conversation about the intersection of law and science. The discovery of potential genetic causes for the deaths of Caleb, Patrick, Sarah, and Laura has challenged the finality of the justice system, forcing a reconciliation between legal truth and evolving biological reality. Beyond the headlines, the true legacy lies with the families left behind. We remember Craig Folbigg, who faced the unthinkable realization that the woman he loved was the source of his greatest grief. We honor the memory of Rachel Barber's parents, who transformed their agony into a quest for awareness, ensuring their daughter's name is associated with love rather than just her tragic end. The hunt for Sian Kingi's justice became a national rallying cry, and the mystery of Tegan Lane continues to fuel a quiet hope for a final resting place. These families demand that the victims are never eclipsed by the notoriety of their killers. Ultimately, these cases force us to confront the banality of evil. These women were not monsters lurking in distant shadows. They were the people next door. They lived in our suburbs and shared our daily lives. Their stories serve as a grim reminder that the capacity for darkness is not confined by gender. Yet, the Australian spirit remains resilient. Through the pursuit of justice, the advancement of science, and the refusal to forget the innocent, the nation continues to seek the why behind the what. It is a journey toward understanding the darkest corners of the human heart, driven by a commitment to ensure the light of truth always finds a way to penetrate the shadows. Vigilance is the price we pay to protect our communities